In March 2023, a truly unprecedented event unfolded, yet it largely escaped the notice of the wider public. For the first time since the tumultuous era of World War II, central banks transitioned from being net sellers of gold to becoming aggressive net buyers. They acquired a staggering 1,036 tons of gold within that single year. Nations such as China, Russia, Turkey, India, Poland, and Singapore were all observed accumulating gold reserves at an accelerated pace. However, their actions extended beyond merely purchasing gold. Concurrently, these nations began divesting themselves of U.S. Treasury bonds. China, for instance, significantly reduced its Treasury holdings by an estimated $300 billion. Even Japan, historically the largest foreign holder of U.S. debt, initiated a selling spree. By January 2026, a critical threshold was crossed, one not seen in over 3 decades. For the first time since the 1990s, central banks collectively now hold more gold than U.S. Treasuries as part of their reserve assets. This confluence of events is neither random nor a mere coincidence. It serves as a potent signal that a 50-year global monetary reset cycle is now entering its climactic final stage. Should this historical pattern continue to hold true, as it has for over 2 centuries, the entire global monetary system is poised for a complete restructuring between 2025 and 2030. The implications are profound. The U.S. dollar's reign as the sole reserve currency will likely end, and the purchasing power of your current savings will diminish dramatically. The financial world order, which has largely persisted since 1971, is on the cusp of being replaced by something entirely new. Over the course of the next 25 minutes, I will meticulously detail this exact 50-year cycle, which has consistently triggered and reshaped global monetary systems since 1821. I will elucidate why we are currently situated in stage 4 of a 5-stage pattern that, without fail, culminates in monetary collapse and subsequent restructuring. We will explore what the 2025 to 2030 reset is likely to entail, drawing insights from historical precedents and, crucially, how you can strategically position yourself before this reset obliterates savings, pensions, and bonds denominated in the old system. Understanding this cycle is not merely an academic exercise, it is fundamental to your financial survival. Historically, approximately every 50 years, the global monetary system experiences a profound fracture. The prevailing currency regime undergoes a fundamental transformation, and wealth is dramatically transferred from those holding ephemeral paper assets to those possessing tangible, hard assets. We are now merely 3 to 5 years away from the precipice of this next inevitable reset. The pattern is irrefutable, the timeline starkly clear, and the telltale signs are unmistakably present for those who know what to discern. Allow me to commence by illustrating this historical pattern, for once you apprehend its relentless consistency, you will grasp precisely why the next reset is not only inevitable, but also profoundly imminent. In 1821, following the exhaustive Napoleonic Wars, Great Britain made the momentous decision to return to the gold standard. For the subsequent 100 years, the British pound sterling was meticulously backed by gold at a fixed and unwavering rate. This established an unparalleled era of monetary stability. Countries worldwide subsequently pegged their own currencies either directly to gold or, more commonly, to the robust pound. International trade consequently flourished, ushering in what became known as the classical gold standard. This remarkably stable system endured from 1821 until 1914. However, the outbreak of World War I utterly shattered it. Governments, in a desperate bid to finance their immense war efforts, were compelled to print vast quantities of money. They suspended gold convertibility and issued currency far in excess of their actual gold reserves. By 1918, the gold standard was, to all intents and purposes, defunct. Currencies were allowed to float freely, inflation soared, and widespread economic chaos ensued. In 1925, precisely 104 years after the inception of the first gold standard, Britain embarked on an ambitious attempt to restore the gold standard at its pre-war parity. This marked the very first reset attempt of the cycle. Chancellor Winston Churchill spearheaded this endeavor, with the pound being repegged to gold at £3, 17 shillings and 10.5 pence per ounce. Other nations, including France, Germany, and the United States, followed suit, reintroducing various forms of gold backing for their currencies. This initiative was intended to resurrect stability, but it was, tragically, built upon an inherent deception. The war had unleashed an uncontrollable torrent of currency and an overwhelming burden of debt. The underlying gold-to-currency ratio was intrinsically unsustainable. The system was, in essence, doomed from its very inception. And so, in 1931, a mere 6 years later, Britain was forced to abandon gold yet again. The Great Depression had struck with full force, prompting countries to engage in destructive competitive currency devaluations. The 1925 reset attempt had failed catastrophically. This period unequivocally represents stage 5 of the preceding monetary cycle, the reset itself, which proved to be an utter failure. Fast forward to 1944, 19 years after the failed 1925 reset and 123 years after the original gold standard, the world made another concerted effort. This time, the momentous gathering took place in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Delegates from 44 nations convened with the singular objective of forging a new global monetary system. Returning to a pure gold standard was no longer a viable option. There simply wasn't enough physical gold to back the colossal currency supplies that had been created during World War II. Consequently, they devised an innovative solution, the Bretton Woods system. Under Bretton Woods, the US dollar was centrally pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. In turn, all other major world currencies were pegged directly to the dollar, effectively making the dollar as good as gold. Participating countries possessed the right to redeem their dollars for gold at the US Treasury, and the US solemnly pledged to uphold this gold backing. This represented the second major reset, and for a significant period, it functioned effectively. From 1944 to 1971, Bretton Woods provided a bedrock of stability. International trade experienced exponential growth, economies expanded robustly, and the US dollar firmly established itself as the undisputed global reserve currency. However, the system harbored a critical, ultimately fatal flaw, the Triffin dilemma. Here's how it manifested. For the rest of the world to have a sufficient supply of dollars to facilitate global trade and investment, the United States was compelled to run persistent trade deficits, thereby injecting dollars abroad. Yet, paradoxically, the more dollars circulated internationally, the less gold backing each individual dollar effectively possessed. By the 1960s, the U.S. had printed a far greater volume of dollars than it had gold reserves to credibly back them. Foreign governments, notably France under the astute leadership of Charles de Gaulle, recognized this growing imbalance. They began to aggressively redeem their dollar holdings for physical gold. U.S. gold reserves plummeted dramatically, falling from over 20,000 tons in 1950 to a mere 8,100 tons by 1971. At that alarming rate of outflow, the U.S. was projected to completely exhaust its gold reserves by 1975. The system was demonstrably breaking down. Returning to a pure gold standard was no longer a viable option. There simply wasn't enough physical gold to back the colossal currency supplies that had been created during World War II. Consequently, they devised an innovative solution, the Bretton Woods system. Under Bretton Woods, the US dollar was centrally pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. In turn, all other major world currencies were pegged directly to the dollar, effectively making the dollar as good as gold. Participating countries possessed the right to redeem their dollars for gold at the US Treasury, and the US solemnly pledged to uphold this gold backing. This represented the second major reset, and for a significant period, it functioned effectively. From 1944 to 1971, Bretton Woods provided a bedrock of stability. International trade experienced exponential growth, economies expanded robustly, and the US dollar firmly established itself as the undisputed global reserve currency. However, the system harbored a critical, ultimately fatal flaw, the Triffin dilemma. Here's how it manifested. For the rest of the world to have a sufficient supply of dollars to facilitate global trade and investment, the United States was compelled to run persistent trade deficits, thereby injecting dollars abroad. Yet, paradoxically, the more dollars circulated internationally, the less gold backing each individual dollar effectively possessed. By the 1960s, the U.S. had printed a far greater volume of dollars than it had gold reserves to credibly back them. Foreign governments, notably France under the astute leadership of Charles de Gaulle, recognized this growing imbalance. They began to aggressively redeem their dollar holdings for physical gold. U.S. gold reserves plummeted dramatically, falling from over 20,000 tons in 1950 to a mere 8,100 tons by 1971. At that alarming rate of outflow, the U.S. was projected to completely exhaust its gold reserves by 1975. The system was demonstrably breaking down. Then, on August 15, 1971, precisely 27 years after the establishment of Bretton Woods, President Richard Nixon unilaterally closed the gold window. He announced that dollars would no longer be convertible into gold. This seismic event constituted the third major reset, famously dubbed the Nixon shock, and it irrevocably changed everything. For the first time in recorded history, the global monetary system became entirely based on pure fiat currency, meaning it had no backing whatsoever from gold or any other commodity, but was merely sustained by government decree and collective trust. From 1971 through to 2025, we have lived squarely within this fiat era. The dollar retained its preeminent reserve currency status, not because of any gold backing, but primarily because oil was mandatorily priced in dollars, the so-called petrodollar system. Furthermore, the sheer dominance of U.S. military power indirectly enforced the usage of the dollar, and, crucially, no credible alternative currency existed that was sufficiently large and liquid enough to challenge or replace it. However, this very system is now 54 years old. And every single previous global monetary system has either collapsed or undergone a significant reset within a lifespan of 50 to 75 years. Consider the historical lifespans. The classical gold standard endured for 93 years, 1821 to 1914. The interwar gold standard, attempted in 1925, rapidly failed after a mere 6 years, lasting effectively 10 years until 1931. Bretton Woods lasted 27 years, 1944 to 1971. The current fiat dollar system, now in its 54th year, 1971 to 2025, is right at the outer edge of the historical lifespan for any monetary regime. And, ominously, the cracks are becoming glaringly visible everywhere we look. Now, let me unveil the 5-stage pattern that virtually every monetary system traverses. Understanding precisely where we currently stand within this cycle provides an unequivocal roadmap to what transpires next. Stage 1. Stability. This is the honeymoon phase, a period of relative calm and confidence. A new monetary system is established, often underpinned by gold or commodity backing, or at the very least, by robust fiscal discipline. The currency is trusted, inflation remains commendably low, and international trade flows smoothly and efficiently. Governments diligently maintain their reserves, and central banks operate with a discernible sense of responsibility. This initial stage typically endures for 10 to 20 years. For our current fiat dollar system, Stage 1 roughly spanned from 1971 to 1985. The dollar remained remarkably strong despite its loss of gold backing, largely due to the formidable dominance of the U.S. economy. The petrodollar system was firmly cemented in 1973 to 74, and Paul Volcker's Federal Reserve subsequently maintained crucial credibility by decisively crushing inflation with interest rates soaring to 20% in the early 1980s. Stage 2. Inflation. This is the juncture where governments, with increasing temerity, begin to exploit and abuse the system. They commence printing more currency than economic growth can legitimately justify, running persistent budget deficits and monetizing national debt. Consequently, inflation steadily rises, but it remains largely manageable, typically ranging from 3% to 7% annually. It's not hyperinflation, but rather a pervasive, chronic inflation that insidiously erodes purchasing power over time. Asset prices inflate across the board. Stocks, real estate, and bonds all appear to rise. People experience a deceptive sense of increasing wealth due to escalating asset values, yet real wages stagnate. The wealth gap inexorably widens. This stage typically persists for 15 to 25 years. For the fiat dollar system, Stage 2 roughly covered the period from 1985 to 2008, marked by persistent deficits, burgeoning debt, and burgeoning asset bubbles, culminating in the dot-com and housing bubbles. Despite these issues, the system appeared stable because inflation remained contained and economic growth largely continued. Stage 3. Crisis. This is the critical turning point where the accumulated abuse of the system becomes utterly unsustainable. A major exogenous shock exposes the inherent fragility of the entire framework. This could manifest as a war, a global pandemic, a devastating financial crash, or a profound geopolitical shift. In response, governments react by printing colossal amounts of currency, causing national debt to explode. Central banks lose their tenuous grip on monetary policy, and inflation spirals dramatically beyond the previously manageable 3 to 7% range. For the fiat dollar system, Stage 3 commenced in 2008 with the devastating global financial crisis. The Federal Reserve injected an unprecedented $4 trillion into the economy through quantitative easing. National debt subsequently doubled from $10 trillion to $20 trillion by 2017. Then, COVID-19 struck in 2020. The Fed responded by printing an additional $5 trillion, pushing debt to $28 trillion, and it currently stands at an astounding $39 trillion. Inflation spiked to an alarming 9% in 2022. The system, quite evidently, is now breaking down in real time. Stage 4. Intervention. This represents the panic phase, a period of desperate, often frantic, attempts by central banks to salvage the collapsing system. They might raise interest rates aggressively in a bid to combat rampant inflation, only to discover that such high rates inevitably crash the broader economy. Conversely, they might then cut rates sharply to stimulate growth, but this merely reignites inflationary pressures. They find themselves ensnared in an inescapable trap with no viable, good options. Governments frequently resort to imposing capital controls, price controls, and currency restrictions. International tensions invariably escalate as nations begin to apportion blame amongst themselves. Crucially, alternative systems start to emerge. Countries increasingly trade outside the traditional dollar framework. They accumulate significant gold reserves, and they forge new bilateral or multilateral monetary arrangements. This, emphatically, is precisely where we are right now in 2025 to 2026. Stage 4. The intervention phase. The Fed raised rates from an effective 0% to 5% in a mere 18 months, the most rapid hiking cycle in recorded history. This move temporarily curbed inflation, but simultaneously triggered a banking crisis, culminating in the collapses of SVB, Signature, and First Republic in 2023. The Fed is now undeniably trapped, rates above 5% risk crashing the economy, while rates below 3% risk reigniting uncontrolled inflation. There truly are no appealing options left. Stage 5. Reset. This is the definitive endgame. The old monetary system either collapses outright or is deliberately abandoned. A new system is then either painstakingly negotiated or forcefully imposed. Currencies are drastically revalued, debts are restructured, or in some cases, outright defaulted upon. Crucially, wealth is systematically transferred from those holding intrinsically fragile paper assets to those possessing robust hard assets. This stage is invariably chaotic, financially painful, and unfolds with remarkable speed, typically transpiring over a concentrated period of 2 to 5 years. Previous resets underscore this. The 1925 reset, though ultimately a failure, took 3 years to fully implement, 1922 to 1925. The 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement was negotiated and implemented in under 2 years. The 1971 Nixon shock unfolded dramatically over a single weekend. The forthcoming reset is highly probable to occur between 2025 and 2030, and it will likely manifest as one of 3 distinct scenarios. Let me now present the 3 plausible reset outcomes, for one of these will almost certainly materialize within the next 5 years. Scenario 1. The gold reset. Under this scenario, central banks persist in their aggressive accumulation of gold. A major, unavoidable crisis then triggers a coordinated, worldwide announcement. Key global currencies will once again be partially backed by gold. This would not represent a full return to the 1821-style gold standard, but rather a hybrid system, perhaps with 20 to 40% gold backing. To make the underlying mathematics function, gold would be significantly revalued from its current approximate $2,700 per ounce to a much higher figure, potentially $10,000 or even $20,000 per ounce. Nations possessing substantial gold reserves, such as the US, Germany, Italy, France, Russia, and China, would reap significant benefits, while those without adequate reserves would suffer. The dollar would likely retain its reserve currency status, but would share that esteemed position with the euro and the yuan. This represents the most orderly type of reset, mirroring the coordinated effort witnessed at Bretton Woods in 1944. Scenario 2. The digital currency reset. In this future, central banks roll out central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, as the foundation of the new monetary system. The dollar, euro, and yuan, among others, would all become entirely digital. Physical cash would be systematically phased out. Every single transaction would be meticulously tracked and recorded. Governments would wield unprecedented total control over spending through programmable money. This would enable several profound capabilities. Negative interest rates. Your digital dollars could lose value if not spent promptly. Targeted stimulus. Governments could send digital money specifically for certain types of purchases. And social credit systems. Your money might only function if you adhere to specific rules or behaviors. This represents the controlled reset. China is already actively piloting its digital yuan, and both the US and Europe are in advanced stages of developing their own CBDCs. Scenario 3. The multipolar chaos reset. This is the disorderly reset. No global agreement is reached amongst major powers. The dollar loses its reserve status, not through a coordinated transition, but through widespread rejection and fragmentation. BRICS nations increasingly trade in their own national currencies or develop a dedicated BRICS currency unit. Europe retreats to using the euro almost exclusively within its bloc. Asia increasingly defaults to the yuan. The world fragments into distinct, competing currency blocs. Exchange rates become wildly volatile and international trade contracts significantly. We would enter a prolonged period of profound monetary chaos, potentially lasting 5 to 10 years, before any new, stable system could emerge. This scenario bears a chilling resemblance to the 1930s, when the classical gold standard collapsed without a viable replacement, leading to competitive devaluations, damaging trade wars, and, ultimately, World War II. Here's why I firmly believe we are unequivocally in Stage 4 right now and rapidly approaching Stage 5 within the next 24 to 60 months. The evidence, when examined, is utterly overwhelming. Evidence 1. Central bank gold buying. In 2023, central banks globally purchased an astonishing 1,036 tons of gold, marking the highest level since 1950. In 2024, they continued this trend, buying another 1,000 plus tons. They are not acquiring gold for conventional investment returns. Gold pays no interest. They are buying it because they fundamentally understand that the dollar system is nearing its end, and gold will serve as an indispensable foundation for whatever new monetary system emerges. Evidence 2. BRICS expansion and de-dollarization. BRICS invited 6 new countries to join its alliance in 2024: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, and Argentina, though Milei subsequently pulled Argentina out. The expanded BRICS bloc now represents a formidable 46% of the global population and approximately 37% of global GDP. Crucially, they are actively constructing alternative payment systems designed to bypass the dollar. Trade between Russia and China, for instance, is now conducted 90% in rubles and yuan, a scenario that was utterly unthinkable just 5 years ago. Evidence 3. U.S. debt crisis. The United States is currently burdened with a colossal $39 trillion in national debt. Annual interest payments alone have reached $2 trillion and are projected to surge to $2 trillion by 2030. The annual deficit exceeds $2 trillion with no credible plan in sight to reduce it. Foreign creditors are actively reducing their holdings of U.S. Treasuries. Japan's holdings have fallen from $3 trillion to under $1 trillion, while China's have plummeted from $3 trillion to a mere $760 billion. The crucial buyers are steadily disappearing. When the next inevitable crisis strikes, the Federal Reserve will be forced to print an additional $5 trillion or more, an action that will utterly destroy what little confidence remains in the dollar. Evidence 4. Petrodollar breakdown. Saudi Arabia, the very cornerstone of the petrodollar system, has formally joined BRICS and now accepts the yuan for Chinese oil purchases. The UAE is also accepting the yuan, and Russia is selling its oil in rubles. The long-standing requirement that oil be purchased exclusively in dollars is rapidly coming to an end. This petrodollar mechanism was the primary structural support underpinning global dollar demand since 1974. Without it, the dollar loses its crucial structural bid. Evidence 5. Loss of monetary control. The Federal Reserve demonstrably lost control of inflation in 2021 to 2022, candidly admitting their initial error regarding transitory inflation. They subsequently raised rates so rapidly that it directly precipitated a banking crisis. Now, they are caught in an inescapable trap. They cannot raise rates further without guaranteed economic collapse, yet they cannot cut rates without reigniting runaway inflation. They are, quite simply, out of effective tools. This is the unmistakable hallmark of Stage 4. Central banks have forfeited control and are merely reacting to events rather than proactively guiding them. Now, let me present the projected timeline for this reset, derived from historical patterns and compelling current indicators. 2025-2026, the current phase. Stage 4 continues its relentless progression. The Fed will likely cut interest rates in response to anticipated economic weakness, but inflation will remain stubbornly elevated, likely in the 3 to 5% range. Stock market volatility will intensify. The BRICS alliance will continue its strategic efforts to build viable alternative financial systems. Gold will continue its upward trajectory, potentially reaching $3,500 to $4,500 per ounce. Treasury yields will spike as global demand for U.S. debt wanes, with the 10-year yield possibly hitting 5% to 6%. The dollar will weaken, but a full collapse is not yet on the immediate horizon. This is fundamentally the instability phase. 2027-2028, crisis trigger. At some point, something will fundamentally break. This could manifest as a failed Treasury auction, where insufficient buyers force the Fed to intervene massively and print unprecedented sums. It could be a major geopolitical event, such as a war with China over Taiwan or a Middle East conflict that severely disrupts global oil supplies. A sovereign debt crisis emanating from Europe or Japan could rapidly spread globally. Alternatively, a major bank failure or a systemic financial system crash could be the catalyst. The specific trigger remains unknowable, but the historical pattern unequivocally indicates that a crisis will inevitably force the reset. When it occurs, the Fed will be compelled to print $5 to $10 trillion in a matter of months, an action that will constitute the final, definitive destruction of confidence in the dollar. Gold will skyrocket to $7,000 to $12,000 per ounce within weeks. The dollar will plummet by 30 to 50% against other major currencies, and inflation will return to double-digit levels. 2028-2030, the reset. A new international monetary conference will be convened, echoing the historic Bretton Woods gathering of 1944. Representatives from the world's major economies will negotiate the framework for a new system. The outcome will be one of the three scenarios I previously described: partial gold backing, full digitalization via CBDCs, or a chaotic multipolar fragmentation. The dollar will irrevocably lose its exclusive reserve currency status, possibly becoming one of several reserve currencies alongside the euro, yuan, and potentially a BRICS currency or a digital gold-backed unit. Currencies will undergo radical revaluation. Debts will be restructured, and some countries will inevitably default. Crucially, wealth will be fundamentally transferred from holders of paper assets, bonds, cash, fixed pensions, to holders of hard assets, gold, silver, real estate, productive businesses. 2030-2035, new system stabilizes. Whatever new monetary system ultimately emerges will be systematically implemented. Stage 1 of the next 50-year cycle will then commence. There will be distinct winners and losers. Those who shrewdly position themselves beforehand will preserve or significantly grow their wealth. Those who failed to prepare will tragically lose 50 to 80% of their purchasing power. Now, allow me to illustrate precisely how this impending reset will systematically destroy wealth if you remain unprepared. You hold cash. Let's assume you have £100,000 in savings. If, during the reset, the dollar or pound is devalued by 40%, a common occurrence for most currencies in previous resets, your £100,000 will suddenly only buy what £60,000 buys today. You will have effectively lost £40,000 in purchasing power overnight. You hold bonds. This includes U.S. Treasuries, corporate bonds, or municipal bonds. If interest rates spike to 8 to 10% during the crisis, as they did dramatically in the 1970s, bond prices can crash by 40 to 60%. Your entire bond portfolio could be utterly decimated. Furthermore, if the reset involves debt restructuring, bondholders could be forced to accept haircuts, meaning they might only recover 50 to 70 pence on the pound. You hold a pension. Most pension funds are typically invested in a 60% stocks, 40% bonds allocation. If, during the reset, stocks crash by 40% and bonds also crash by 40% simultaneously, your pension could lose 40% of its value. If the pension fund was already underfunded, as many notoriously are, it could collapse entirely. Millions of retirees could see their promised pensions slashed by 30%, 50%, or even more. You hold fixed-rate debt, such as a mortgage. This is actually a relatively favorable position during periods of high inflation. If you have a £300,000 mortgage at 3% and inflation soars to 15%, you'll be paying back the loan with increasingly cheaper pounds, thus significantly reducing your real debt burden. However, if you possess variable rate debt or are forced to refinance during the crisis, interest rates could easily surge to 10 to 15%, potentially tripling your monthly payments. You hold dollars or pounds in a foreign bank account. If capital controls are imposed, which has been a recurring feature of previous resets, you might find yourself unable to access your own money. Capital controls notoriously froze bank accounts in Cyprus in 2013, in Argentina on multiple occasions, and in Greece in 2015. During a reset, governments will undoubtedly restrict money movement to prevent catastrophic capital flight. Here's what you must do to strategically position yourself for the impending reset. These are not mere predictions. These are the proven strategies that have consistently worked during every previous monetary reset. Strategy 1. Own physical gold and silver. I refer to physical metal you can literally hold in your hand, not ETFs or mining stocks. Gold is the quintessential monetary reset asset. It is invariably revalued upwards in every reset. In 1933, President Roosevelt revalued gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, a staggering 69% increase overnight. In 1971, gold surged from $35 to over $800 by 1980, a colossal 22-fold increase. In the next reset, should gold be remonetized, it could realistically ascend from its current $2,700 to $10,000 or even higher. Allocate 10 to 30% of your liquid net worth to physical gold and silver. Store some at home and some in a private, non-bank vault. Strategy 2. Own productive real assets. This includes real estate in robust, growing markets, fertile farmland, essential infrastructure, and businesses that produce fundamental, indispensable goods. These assets inherently maintain their value through resets because they generate real output and income regardless of the prevailing currency system. A farm continues to produce food irrespective of the currency. A rental property continues to generate income. Paper assets are destroyed, real assets endure. Strategy 3. Eliminate variable rate debt, but keep fixed rate debt. If you have credit cards, home equity lines of credit, Helix or adjustable rate mortgages, pay them off without delay. Interest rates could spike to 12 to 20% during the crisis. However, if you hold a fixed rate 30-year mortgage at 3 to 4%, keep it. High inflation will significantly reduce your real debt burden, turning it into a win for you. Strategy 4. Hold some foreign currency exposure. Do not be 100% denominated in dollars or pounds. Consider holding Swiss francs, Norwegian kroner, or Singapore dollars, currencies underpinned by strong fiscal positions, low national debt, and significant commodity wealth. Diversifying across sound currencies significantly reduces your reset risk. Strategy 5. Own Bitcoin as a hedge. Bitcoin is currently the only truly scarce digital asset that operates entirely without central bank control. Its supply is strictly capped at 21 million coins. No government or entity can print more. During a currency reset, Bitcoin could potentially function as a neutral, global digital store of value. It is undoubtedly volatile and risky, but it represents the only asset that exists entirely outside the traditional financial system. Consider allocating 1 to 5% of your net worth to Bitcoin. Strategy 6. Build skills and self-sufficiency. During periods of reset, supply chains frequently break down, inflation spirals, and essential goods become scarce. Ensure you have stored food, water, and other vital essentials. Cultivate practical skills that generate tangible value: medical, mechanical, agricultural. The individuals who suffer most grievously during resets are those who are entirely dependent on fragile, interconnected systems. Let me conclude by presenting the brutal, unvarnished truth. The 50-year monetary reset cycle is not some abstract theory or academic hypothesis. It is a meticulously documented historical pattern that has repeated with astonishing consistency for over 200 years. Asterisk 1821, the classical gold standard was firmly established. Asterisk 1914, it collapsed due to World War I, lasting 93 years. Asterisk 1925, an attempted reset failed within 6 years. Asterisk 1944, the Bretton Woods reset was implemented, lasting 27 years. Asterisk 1971, the Nixon shock initiated the fiat system, which is now 54 years and counting. Asterisk 2025 to 2030, the next reset is due. The pattern unequivocally dictates it is time. The overwhelming evidence confirms we are firmly in stage 4 of a 5-stage process. The timeline clearly points to 2 to 5 years. The monetary system we have all lived under since 1971 is demonstrably nearing its end. Not because I say so, but because every single monetary system in recorded history has reached its culmination within 50 to 75 years. We are now at year 54, pushing the very outer limits of its viability. And the unmistakable signs of imminent collapse are everywhere. Central banks buying gold at unprecedented rates, BRICS nations constructing robust alternative payment systems, the petrodollar system slowly dying, U.S. debt spiraling uncontrollably, the Federal Reserve having lost all semblance of control over inflation and interest rates, and foreign creditors systematically reducing their holdings of U.S. Treasuries. Every single indicator that historically preceded previous resets is currently flashing a vivid, undeniable red. The 2025 to 2030 reset will inevitably result in a massive transfer of wealth from paper assets to hard assets. From those clinging to cash, bonds, and fixed pensions to those wisely holding gold, real estate, productive businesses, and scarce digital assets. This process is not inherently fair or just, but it is precisely what transpires in every single reset. And you likely have only 24 to 60 months remaining to position yourself before it all unfolds. The reset will not be graciously announced in advance. It will occur suddenly, precipitously, during a crisis, perhaps a frantic weekend emergency meeting, followed by a coordinated central bank announcement. And by Monday morning, the rules will have fundamentally changed. Your dollars will be worth less. Your bonds will be restructured. Your accumulated savings will have lost substantial purchasing power unless you meticulously positioned yourself beforehand. If this video has opened your eyes to a monetary cycle you had never before perceived, if you now grasp that the financial system you have inhabited your entire life is on the brink of being replaced, then I urge you to subscribe to this channel immediately. Subsequent videos will meticulously cover precisely which assets to acquire, which to divest, and provide a month-by-month timeline as we rapidly approach the reset. The 50-year monetary reset cycle is not merely coming, it is unequivocally here. We are in Stage 4. Stage 5 is a mere 2 to 5 years away. The only remaining question is whether you recognize this profound shift before the reset occurs, or whether you awaken one morning to discover your hard-earned wealth has been irrevocably restructured by central banks and governments operating in the throes of a global crisis. The cycle is undeniable. The timeline is clear, and the signs are everywhere. Welcome to Stage 4. The reset is coming. The pattern unequivocally dictates it is time. The overwhelming evidence confirms we are firmly in Stage 4 of a 5-stage process. The timeline clearly points to 2 to 5 years. The monetary system we have all lived under since 1971 is demonstrably nearing its end. Not because I say so, but because every single monetary system in recorded history has reached its culmination within 50 to 75 years. We are now at year 54, pushing the very outer limits of its viability. And the unmistakable signs of imminent collapse are everywhere. Central banks buying gold at unprecedented rates, BRICS nations constructing robust alternative payment systems, the petrodollar system slowly dying, U.S. debt spiraling uncontrollably, the Federal Reserve having lost all semblance of control over inflation and interest rates, and foreign creditors systematically reducing their holdings of U.S. Treasuries. Every single indicator that historically preceded previous resets is currently flashing a vivid, undeniable red. The 2025 to 2030 reset will inevitably result in a massive transfer of wealth from paper assets to hard assets. From those clinging to cash, bonds, and fixed pensions to those wisely holding gold, real estate, productive businesses, and scarce digital assets. This process is not inherently fair or just, but it is precisely what transpires in every single reset. And you likely have only 24 to 60 months remaining to position yourself before it all unfolds. The reset will not be graciously announced in advance. It will occur suddenly, precipitously, during a crisis, perhaps a frantic weekend emergency meeting, followed by a coordinated central bank announcement. And by Monday,